Thank you. Since we're running really short of time, I'll try to summarize my comments in less than 5 minutes. Again, thank you very much for giving the opportunity for us on behalf of the Tata Group to be at the session and share some of our perspectives on the ASEAN-India partnership. The ASEAN-India partnership document of 2012 clearly articulated a vision to strive towards a full, effective and timely implementation of the ASEAN-India dialogue across the whole spectrum of political and security, economic, social, cultural and development cooperation across all stakeholders. I am actually going to, in my comments, clearly I'm going to focus a lot on the economic linkages, being a member of the corporate sector. But given the emphasis in our group, Tata Group, towards building broader stakeholder value, I strongly believe that we as a corporate sector should look at issues beyond that just of business, but also of the wider community. We want to be part of the ASEAN-India economic dialogue, but as well as the ASEAN-India social, cultural and development story, because that's where we actually build greater stakeholder connectivity. As one of the keynote speakers last evening mentioned, ASEAN is an obvious trade partner for us. In the same way, trade with other major partners and blocs have increased substantially in the last 10 years. We've seen a jump in our trade with ASEAN countries as well. Though today's numbers peg ASEAN-India trade volume at around $76 billion, and though this may make ASEAN one of our largest trading partners, this represents only 3% of all of ASEAN's trade, and hence there's a tremendous scope for increasing it further. I just want to before I get into some specifics, I just want to spend a few seconds on what the Tatas are and what we do in the region. We actually have operations and do business in all the 10 ASEAN countries across a wide variety of industries that we operate in. We run steel plants in Singapore and Thailand. We've got manufacturing facilities in Myanmar, Thailand, and we also market our commercial vehicles in many parts of ASEAN. Our technology company has got delivery centers in Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and clients in 3 or 4 other ASEAN countries. On the energy side, we source raw material coal from Indonesia, and we've actually signed up projects to build power plants in Vietnam and Myanmar. And the list goes on. I mean, one of the challenges of having a group that got so many different companies that we have an engagement which cuts across various different sectors in the ASEAN region. And given the existing presence and potential, we are at the holding company are in the process of setting up a representative office for the Tata Group, focusing specifically on ASEAN, to be initially headquartered in Singapore. Having said that, I'll spend the rest of my talk more talking from an Indian corporate perspective. And as a multinational with strong India roots and a big believer in the potential of ASEAN, I think we do have a great interest, and I'm sure so do other companies that are in the same boat as us, in moving forward in the implementation of the vision on the economic front, which is focused on advancing economic cooperation across the 2 geographies. The Indian government has clearly made strides in developing relations with the ASEAN through the Look East policy over the last couple of decades. I think it's time that we as corporate sectors, both in India, definitely in India, look at building our own Look East strategy that complements what the government is actually doing from a political perspective. So I think, and I was talking to one of the Indian ambassadors to one of the ASEAN countries, and I think corporate India needs to work more closely as a team to identify strategic projects in some of these ASEAN countries and go and present a solution to our government by which we can actually build these institutional relationships and opportunities. I think there's a great advantage of us going together as one to solve specific problems. I'll actually sort of focus on 6 or 7 areas where we believe there's some specific ways we as a corporate sector can drive towards building a greater ASEAN-India growth of ASEAN-India economic dialogue. I think the minister this morning emphasized the importance of connectivity. In our view, connectivity is the most important part of building this greater trade and investment links between ASEAN and India. The rest of the categories which I'll talk about, which is energy cooperation, infrastructure, manufacturing, services, skill, tourism, all these things will actually not be very realistic unless we have a very strong connectivity. And by connectivity, I think I would classify them into 4 or 5 different buckets. One clearly is road, second is maritime, third is aviation, fourth is digital connectivity, something which I think we should spend more time on, because the world is becoming more and more digital, and therefore it's equally important to place importance on the digital connectivity as the other physical connectivity. I think and one of the early speakers talked about connectivity in the supply chain, which I thought was very interesting. And this will foster people to people, business to business, government to government relations, and build an ecosystem for greater bilateral trade and investment. Clearly, the road connectivity would bring more vibrancy to the northeastern states. Maritime connectivity, in addition to the importance from a security perspective, has also significant positive implications for logistics and easing transportation costs. And from an India perspective, opens up some very interesting opportunities on the east coast. And there are a few industrial parks that are being considered on the eastern coast, which will actually get benefit from looking at greater maritime connectivity with the ASEAN. Aviation connectivity, and we as a group, we actually are partners with two different airlines from the southeast, from the ASEAN region coming into India. And I'll talk more about it later, but aviation connectivity is very important and has the ability to promote tourism, cultural exchanges, and ease the accessibility for business. And the last point, which is digital connectivity, is very important to share information, ideas, technologies, innovation, and design. On the energy front, I think there's a lot of opportunities on the ASEAN-India corridor. ASEAN can be a partner in helping India with some of our energy challenges, given the rich raw materials present in some parts of the region. On the same way, Indian industry can play a prominent role in helping certain ASEAN countries develop the energy infrastructure. Bringing Indian expertise in developing sophisticated power plants to generate energy at globally competitive costs and in an environmental friendly manner is something we as India should be actively articulating. And again, from a narrow perspective, the Tatas, we actually signed up two different initiatives, one in Myanmar, one in Vietnam, other one in Myanmar. We collectively should put forward our best foot to leverage these resources and strengths on both sides to address our respective needs. The other point I want to mention out here is that Indian companies have increasingly developed expertise in developing power projects in renewables, especially hydro, and creating opportunities to facilitate Indian companies in this space to compete and look for opportunities in those ASEAN countries that have got very good access to hydro is a good way to look at specific initiatives. On the infrastructure side, some of the areas where I think we could focus on as corporate sector is water sanitation, road and rail development, urban planning, again just mentioned by one of the earlier speakers, and power, are areas where Indian businesses can bring their expertise into select ASEAN markets. But the challenge here from an implementation perspective is identification of these projects, creating an information network that will help corporate sector in India connect to the opportunities very early on, as well as identify appropriate local partners and help execute these projects. So we know that these projects exist from a macro perspective. How do we get information early? How do we get the right people to partner with? Is something is very, very important. And in this perspective, when we look through the vision statement, one of the aspirations in the vision statement is to strengthen private sector engagement in PPP linkages. We believe that in the area of infrastructure is where we can really focus on creating appropriate PPPs and get Indian companies to participate. A related topic which I also want to place on record is the importance of appropriate financing solutions. And that's another area where I think a combination of our government and appropriate sort of financing agencies, if they do exist on the other side, can play an important role to facilitate Indian companies to participate in projects in infrastructure. We see this happening at a much more mature level in other geographies, and I think there's a very strong case to be made for an increasing involvement on coming up with appropriate financing structure for these infrastructure projects in the region. On the manufacturing side, given our personal experience, we believe there's a case to be made to bring low-cost, high-quality manufacturing from India into ASEAN. We've done some interesting localization projects in Thailand where the experience has been good. I think it's important for us to be able to communicate better among our other companies in the country as well. On the services side, there's a potential for the more developed markets from the ASEAN, such as Singapore, for example, and Malaysia, to create services and IT services and IT hubs which can help Indian companies sort of cater to the demands in the ASEAN market and also the global market. In fact, I was on a call this morning with one of our senior executives in one of our companies, and he was mentioning that increasingly Indian companies are using bases in places like Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines to actually service not just the ASEAN market but also the global markets and the global customer base. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I think that's an area where we can drive greater linkages. On the financials, and I think there was a discussion on SMEs and the role of SMEs in the corridor. You know, we happen to have a company which focuses on the SME space in the financial services area. I'm sure that's the case with YD as well. It's very important for the SMEs to get access to high quality information and opportunities on the ASEAN side, because the cost of getting information, the cost of getting data on where opportunities lie is a pretty high for these SMEs. And if we collectively can create some sort of a B2B portal which will enable manufacturers and suppliers to get a better understanding of the opportunities on the ASEAN side, and vice versa for ASEAN SMEs to get an insight of what the opportunities exist on the Indian side, will be very, very useful. Moving quickly onto the skills and the soft infrastructure side, by increasing people-to-people exchanges and sharing best practices and educational programs, we really believe we can help both ASEAN and India develop the skills they need to support their fast growth. I want to actually sort of complement the English language training program, which I think is we get feedback that's actually been very helpful in enabling our companies to connect better with the opportunities in the ASEAN markets, and we should also figure out a way for private sector also to get involved to advance the agenda. The other initiative which on the skill side, and I want to sort of give one example of the one which government is actually supporting in Myanmar with the Myanmar Institute of Information Technology. It's those type of programs, and if we can actually get private sector to participate along with the government, it's something which we'll be very supportive with. I'll conclude by making one last point on tourism. Tourism is a great opportunity on the India-ASEAN corridor, and instead of looking at it from a broad, from a macro perspective, I think it will be useful to create destination corridors. This is a way where we can leverage the historical and religious links on the ASEAN-India corridor by facilitating tourism to religious and historical sites. And for tourism to work, getting greater aviation connectivity and making it easy for tourists and businesses to come in with much lesser hazards on the visa front is very important. So again, I'd like to thank all of you for giving us an opportunity. We as a group, and I'm sure I speak for all of us in the corporate sector, are very committed to growing this particular agenda. And I think initiatives like the Delhi Dialogue and the Business Forum are very, very useful in moving this forward. Thank you very much.